Are you sick and tired of feeling sick and tired? Are you over being so fatigued that you don't have energy for your kids, for your partner, for yourself, for your friends? Are you overwhelmed with everyday life and not sure why? Do you feel like that everybody else seems to be able to cope and handle, but for some reason you can't? Well, to cover these mystery complex cases, I've brought together some of the most brilliant minds in the alternative health space. We'll be talking everything from psychedelics to mental health, mindfulness, spiritual health, physical health. If it has to do with living your best life, I'm going to have a guest on covering that topic. Hey there, I'm Heather Gray, a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and certified bioenergetic practitioner, and I am the Renegade Health Boss. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you will enjoy this show. And my next guest is no different, and I was just fangirling a little bit over him before we got on, and I'm probably going to make myself turn red again. But I have been such a huge fan of his for so long. I did his Gluten-Free Warrior course. I there wasn't a whole lot of doctors out there talking the same kind of talk that I was. And when I went through his course, and he's bringing everything into it, from toxins to mental health, like everything I talk about, he's the first doctor. I was just like, hallelujah, this man is amazing. And I've been following him ever since. And so I'm so excited to, bring him to you folks today, and hopefully you'll fall in love with him the way that I have. So without further ado, Dr. Peter Osborne, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit of your backstory. Most of us don't get into this alternative, health and wellness space without some sort of a story to tell. Your book, No Pains, No Grains, there's got to be, I know a lot of it has just been clinical correlation, things that you saw over and over and over again and people getting better. But can you dive deeper into, why the gluten-free lifestyle?
I mean, I started out originally, I was doing an internship at the VA hospital in the rheumatology department. And so everything rheumatology, you see Lyme related, as an example, Lyme related rheumatoid arthritis, you see non-Lyme related rheumatoid arthritis, and every other type of autoimmune arthritis you could imagine, from ankylosing spondylitis to reactive arthritis to psoriatic arthritis to scleroderma and dermatomyositis. I mean, just the plethora of rheumatological diseases. And so what always struck me was going through that rotation, nobody ever got better. And so that was kind of frustrating to see. You'd throw steroids or you'd throw what are called DMARDs, disease modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, things like methotrexate and hydroxychloroquine. Before COVID, hydroxychloroquine was actually a drug used in rheumatological disease for decades, relatively safe drug, but not a great long-term strategy for trying to resolve why a person's having an autoimmune arthritis. And so one of the things that happened during this rotation, it was actually the first day of the rotation, I was handed a book. It was called The Primer on Rheumatological Disease. It's about that thick, and they said, don't come back unless you read it. And so I go home, and it's Friday, and I go home and I read the book from cover to cover and take copious notes, and come back on Monday, and I'm just quiet. I'm observant. I generally don't try to make a fuss or a holler, but I try to learn first, and I try to humble myself to be able to learn. And I observed for the first 2 weeks during this rotation, and I observed that the doctors weren't doing really what the book had taught me. And the book was written, by the way, by rheumatologists. It was written by dozens of experts all across the world had gotten together to write this book that is the rheumatological Bible, right? And so when you're reading through it, and you read chapter after chapter after disease, and you see the same patterns, which are there are triggers for autoimmune disease. Now, nobody ever in the book put it super succinctly. It was more along lines of, okay, we see these trends and patterns, for example, in Graves' disease, where these people are field workers, and so they're more exposed to different kinds of pesticides, and so they have much higher rates and predisposition to certain types of autoimmunity. And we see the same thing over here with rheumatoid arthritis. We see that many of these people are also celiac, and when celiacs go on gluten-free diets, their rheumatological diseases get better. And I'm like, why aren't we doing this stuff. Because here I am, I'm observing, and they asked me to read this book. And again, I'm a family guy. I just ignored my family all weekend for your, for your pleasure, and not really, but
Yeah.
I believe in education. I believe in being educated, and so I don't balk at reading. But my point is, you asked me to read the book, and you're not applying what's in the book, and now I'm observing you not applying it. And so my first question is, why did you ask me to read the book? And that didn't come to great reviews. And so I was kind of told to be quiet. And I said, look, well, let's take some of these patients. If rheumatological disease has triggers, let's start measuring for these triggers, right? Let's measure people for gluten sensitivity. Let's measure them for pesticide exposure. Let's measure them. There were 4 categorical triggers. The way I summarized it all was: food's a trigger, chemical exposures are triggers, microbial imbalance is a trigger, and vitamin mineral deficiencies are a trigger. And so you have 4 categorical triggers for autoimmune disease, and none of them were being measured, and everything was being medicated. And the end result of medication after decades was, your joints have still failed, and now you need surgery. Let's replace your joint. Only now you're 2 decades into malnourishment, because the very drugs we're giving you to control your symptoms are destroying your gut lining and causing malabsorption. So none of these veterans, and by the way, these are veterans, and I'm a veteran, so I have a place in my heart for veterans, and they're now not recovering from their surgery, right? So we have something called failed surgery syndrome, which is medicate them for 20 years, try to put a new joint in them. When that fails, now they're in a wheelchair, and their life is basically at an end. And that, to me, that was just really crap care. And it's not to speak poorly of the doctors there. They weren't trained to understand it this way. And so they really were under a lot of pressure, and they were really trained really just to medicate symptoms, as you said earlier, put a Band-Aid on it. And that just doesn't work. So after making many attempts at trying to get the doctors there to apply a gluten-free diet, to apply fasting, to apply vitamin D supplementation, to apply fish oil supplementation, it was all a fail. And so when I left, I was very relieved to be out of that environment, because it wasn't an environment anyone was healing in, and it was very frustrating. So one of my first private practice patients was a 9-year-old girl by the name of Ginger, and she had been diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis at the age of 2. And so her drug was methotrexate, which is a cancer drug that they use to control pain in rheumatoid arthritis. And so for 7 years, they had this little girl from the age of 2 to the age of 9 on methotrexate. They had embedded a permanent port in her arm because her pain, even with the drugs, weren't controlled. So she was in and out of the hospital for pain management, basically. And so at the end of that 7-year, what I like to call torture session of false hope, they looked at her mom and said, she's got 6 months. You need to go home and get her affairs and your affairs in order. And that's it. We can't do anything more for her. So it's like they wanted her to trust them that these were the right things to do. And for 7 years, she trusted them, and then they abandoned her at the end, right? And so imagine, I'm a parent. I can only imagine hearing that from a doctor who you've been trusting for 7 years to help, take care of your precious child. And so, it made me mad. It made me mad at first, because hearing that story when she told it to me, because I thought, well, here I am, I'm like the 8th doctor, and I should have been the first. And so she had to go through all that to get to me, and I wasn't the first choice. I was like, let's throw a Hail Mary, and maybe this quack doctor in Sugar Land can help us. Like, I'm a realist, I'm a chiropractor, and I know that most of the world looks at chiropractic as if they're quacks and not real doctors. And I really don't care about that, but that is a reality. And so that's part of it is I wasn't the first choice. I was the last. Well, this little girl was sensitive to gluten, and she was allergic to blueberries. And when we made those 2 changes, the port came out within 6 months. Within 12 months, she was in full remission, and she's gone on since then to graduate from college. And this was after a 6-month life sentence. And here I am, I'm just a chiropractor, but we were able to resolve a life-threatening illness in her. And I realized at that moment, when I knew she was in recovery, which was about 12 months after, I knew she was tracking and trajecting in the right direction, but I realized what I learned at the VA hospital was so important, and it was being ignored. So I can't take credit for the work, but I can take credit for putting the work into action. And it was that moment that I knew that that information needed to get out into more people's hands. And that's why I founded Gluten-Free Society. So that was, that was a long time ago. 2010 was when we actually went live with Gluten-Free Society. But that's kind of where it came from. It didn't come from me being sick or struggling with illness so much as it just came from I live, breathe, eat, and sleep functional medicine, and there aren't very many people that love it that much. But I like to get people better, and I really take my job quite seriously. And as an empathic type of person, when somebody comes to you, you don't just have a conversation and go home and forget who they are and see them next time. You take them home with you, that you carry the weight of their pain and their grief with you, and you think about them on a regular basis, and you pray about them on very regularly, and you take your job seriously enough that you don't quit. You just keep pushing to try to educate yourself so that you can get better and better and better and better. And so, of course, that's where Gluten-Free Society has been a gift to the world from me. It's a very expensive endeavor. A lot of people don't realize that, but we've poured hundreds of thousands of dollars of research and manpower and funding into that site so that it can reach and take this message that can save a person's life who has autoimmune disease, literally save their life. And it's free. So, that's my background. And then I also run a clinical practice where I see people. I take on a small amount of new clients a year, about 300. I generally don't try to do more than that because you get too busy and then you can't give good care. So
Absolutely. I can't believe I've been following you this whole time and I didn't realize you were in the military. What branch were you in?
I was in the Air Force.
Okay, that actually explains a lot because I know your heart, right? But you've got a very serious demeanor. Some would say, kind of a resting bitch face. I have one too. It takes one to know one. So, but knowing that you're ex-military, I'm like, oh, that's starting to add up. But that book, that's why, like, every time I hear you talk, like, I feel this part of me just jumping inside screaming, yes, yes, yes. I've heard Ginger's story before. I've read the book, and you still almost made me cry as you're telling it again, because there are just still too many people out there suffering for way too long. My kid was diagnosed celiac, and he was born in 2003. He was diagnosed at the age of 3, so 2006, right? And back then it was just do a gluten-free diet, right? That was all we were told. Kid still wasn't sleeping at night, was still extremely constipated. His gut was a mess, like antibiotics, the whole thing, right? Everything that we talk about. And, he's still kind of a mess. And now he's an adult and he doesn't let me, experiment on him like I wish he would. If he would listen to me, I know he could feel better, but sometimes your family can't hear you. And that's why I love giving them books like yours, because they can hear it from you, right? If they can't hear it from me, I want to hear them from you. I don't care where they hear it from, as long as they hear it, because I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves. I co-wrote a book with somebody who had recipes in the back. It was for autoimmune diseases, and their recipe was grains. I thought my head was going to explode. I actually told her, you can't put that recipe in this book or I'm going to pull my chapter from the book. Like, that's how serious I was about it, about getting this information out there, right? And spreading what you've been saying for so very long, because it's needed to be heard over and over and over again until we wake up.
Yeah, I think realistically, not everyone will ever wake up. The psychology I've seen repetitively is that the level of a person's pain has to be greater than their fear of change. And sometimes even when it is greater than their fear of change, they still don't change because there's addictions and there are other psychology issues that underlie why they eat the way they eat. And there's, of course, the social paradigm of, hey, food is love, right? And so let me make you something out of my love that is killing you. And that's perfectly socially acceptable. And it's not to say that the world is bad and that people are bad. It's just simply to say that there's not enough social support around diet and lifestyle and nutrition as a means to be your own doctor. Because if doctors were pushing that message, then hospitals would be closing down. We wouldn't really need much. We might need an occasional acute care type of facility to sew a wound up, or to set an arm, or if it was broken, or to repair or sew somebody back together. But most people could doctor themselves if society would get on board with not profiteering off of the pain and suffering of others as a means or as a guise of compassion, because that's really a big part of it too, is the, you know, what's the saying? The road to hell is paved with good intent.
Mm.
And, you know, a lot of doctors are well-meaning, right? They hear your symptoms and they really do want you to feel better, right? And so in that good intent, what's their first inclination? It's to give you a chemical to suppress the very warning your body's trying to send you to make a change, right? And then if somebody else says, well, you should change your diet, and the doctor, instead of saying, that's a good idea, they usually say, well, diet has nothing to do with it. Like, that's where it becomes malicious, in my opinion. Like, their intent is not malicious until they get into the realm of that language. And then it's like, most medical doctors aren't even qualified to make a claim or a statement about nutrition, because there's no nutrition taught. You know, you get less than 7 hours of nutrition in the average medical school, and the class is something like, welcome to Nutrition 101. Nutrition's not important. We'll see you at the end when we pass you for a test we don't really give you. And that's nutrition training. But most people don't realize that. Like, the customer, the patient that goes in to see the doctor it has the understanding in their own mind that the doctor is somehow trained in nutrition and biochemistry to a level of expertise. And so it's a mismatch, right? It's like if I went to the plumber and I thought they were an electrician, right? And so now I'm giving them the job of the electrician, and they can't do that job, but they're claiming that they can do that job, and they're not denying that they can't do that job. And then when they baffle it all up, they're like, well, electricity is not all that important anyway, right? So I mean, that's kind of the analogy, at least the way I see it.
Well, and we've been brainwashed at such an early age. I mean, do you remember the commercials? These are a part of a balanced breakfast. Bullshit.
Yeah.
That's diabetes in the making. That's autoimmune disease in the making. Like, that's not a part of a balanced breakfast. And so we've got it from a couple different sources, right? Of these poor doctors not getting the training they need, and then big food companies, you know, steering the marketing, the foods being addictive. Like, it really is, it's a mess. And those of us that want to get better and have to become our own health advocates, it can be very isolating, because like you said, it's not set up in the world for us to be healthy. And so for us to have to take that into our own hands. And I think that's probably another reason why I gravitated towards you, is because there wasn't a whole lot of people talking like that, let alone, you know, a doctor. And I was just like, oh, my people, you know, when I met you in person last year, I almost bowled you over because I was just so excited to see you in person. Because it's just so isolating to give this message over and over and over again. And when you hear someone singing the same song, it was just very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, birds of a feather, right?
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. Hey, this is a great time. We're going to pause here for a commercial. When we get back, we're going to dive a little bit deeper. We're going to actually segue into another thing that about health that he's going through right now that I just recently found out. So trust me, you're not going to want to miss a single moment. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
When you're facing painful symptoms, a diagnosis of chronic Lyme, or an autoimmune disease, it can be overwhelming to navigate. You already know mainstream medicine doesn't have the tools to support you, and often even alternative medicine can become a maze of options without sustained results. Modern living puts significant stress on our systems. To counter this, we need a holistic approach, utilizing the latest technology and guided by physicians with decades of clinical experience. This is biological medicine. The Biomed Center in Scottsdale, Arizona is one of the most comprehensive clinics in the world, incorporating the latest diagnostics available, such as full-body MRIs, computer regulation thermography, heart rate variability, toxin screenings, and along with hormone and gut testing, they achieve the broadest look at all systems of the body. Customized protocols are developed by physicians who have treated thousands of patients in chronic disease by optimizing their biological performance. Save yourself years of suffering and searching with a visit to the Biomed Center, Scottsdale. The future of medicine is here.
Hey there. I used to not be able to drink coffee. I always reacted to it horribly. It hurt my stomach. It made me over jittery and would inflame me and cause histamine issues. but not anymore. Not that since I started drinking Danger Coffee by Dave Asprey. It's his next level of coffees. He came out with Bulletproof, and now this is the next level up. So it is mold-free, toxin-free, and he infuses it with minerals and electrolytes. So unlike other coffees, they can actually pull minerals and electrolytes from your system because it's too acidic. It actually helps replenish those. And so I don't react to it at all. I get to have my bulletproof coffee with my MCT oil and my grass-fed butter, and I don't get the jitters, I don't get the crashes, and I love how focused and energized it makes me feel. Again, non-toxic, mold-free, infused with minerals and electrolytes. I absolutely love Danger Coffee. Make sure to check out my website, thelyboss.com. Go to the resource section and get yours. Awesome. Welcome back. Thanks again for joining us. Oh my gosh, this has been so exciting. Maybe I'm just a dork, but could be a little bit of both. I know from running into Dr. Osborne at Mindshare this last year, he told me a little bit about a mold story and some mold documentary that he's working on right now. And it's passion. Part that I'm passionate about as well. I've had a mold story myself when I was getting over Lyme. Most of us Lymies also have mold issues. Most of us with the autoimmune. It all kind of goes together in one nice, sophisticated mess. So tell us a little bit more about like what you're up to and why mold.
Yeah, several years ago, I built a house, and we had we had what we thought was a really great contractor putting it all together, and we vehemently expressed the desire to not have a mold problem, as we were doing the architecture work and as we were going through the process of design. And anyway, we're in this house, and it's about a year and a half in, and my wife can smell like a little musty smell. And so we call the builder, and we tell them what we're smelling, and they come out, they send their mold inspector out, and they run some tests, and they actually find it. They find it to the tune of there's about 9,000 spore counts in the air of Aspergillus penicillium, which anything over 1,300 is considered high. So that it wasn't a small amount, but they downplayed it quite a bit. And their solution was, because they couldn't find a source, they said they looked everywhere, couldn't find running water, couldn't find like a spot where mold was visibly growing, but they could measure it. They could measure it in the air. So their answer was to scrub the air with these big, powerful industrial air scrubbers and HEPA vacuum the walls in the rooms adjacent to where we were smelling it. And so then they proceeded to do that, and then came right back out, and the guy comes out, and he turns the air scrubber off, and then he immediately proceeds to repeat the mold test. The air test.
Oh, wait, what?
Yeah. So my wife was there. I wasn't there at the time she shared this story with me. She said, yeah, he came in, turned it off, and then immediately started to do this air test. And I asked him, I said, won't that lead to a negative result, even though it might not be negative? And he's like, oh no, we do this all the time. Like, he just blew her off and gaslighted her. It was really at that point where I knew we were dealing with somebody who was a total idiot and didn't know what he was doing. And actually, maybe even not that. Maybe he wasn't a total idiot. The more I think about it, he was probably just maliciously trying to hide it, because his client was the builder who didn't want to take the obligation of, correcting the problem in an appropriate way. And anyway, all that being said, we went through a few rounds of air scrubbing and trying to find mold. And again, we went through a number of different mold inspections. Nobody could really figure it out. In the meantime, my wife's getting sicker and sicker and sicker, to the point where I have to finish her sentences. She's early onset dementia. And, my dog, who's 9 pounds, she starts to develop organ failure, and her bowels start shutting down. My other dog, who's a German Shepherd of 100 pounds, you can now feel his spine down his back. He's now 85 pounds. And we were really blessed, because I was trying to figure out, how do we find what's going on, because here we are, we're in this house, and we certainly could move, but we're on a farm, and we have all these animals, and so we have all this responsibility with our farm. And where are we going to go if we have to leave? And, there's just a lot of logistics in that, but my wife's getting sicker and I don't feel so great either. I've put on at this point about 25 pounds of visceral fat. Every time I try to work out, I get injured for a week and can't keep going and can't keep sustaining. My mind, which usually works very quickly, is starting to slow down dramatically, and I don't know why. And so in my endeavors and search to try to find somebody who is capable of doing a decent mold inspection, I guess God's hand was in it, but I found a man, actually a family, their family run business. And so I call him and he comes out, and within 5 minutes, he's giving me photographic evidence of mold behind my wall cavity. And he finds it that fast. And so then I said, okay, well, I want you to test the whole house. I want you to test everything that you do, just do it. So he comes back, but he tells us, he says, you've got such a problem here, you need to get out of the house. And so that was the day we left. Once he told us that, we walked out. We spent 2 months recovering in an extended stay hotel about 10 miles away from our farm. And it was miserable. You can imagine being in a 1-bedroom extended stay hotel with 2 dogs, and your son, and who's a teenager who also is not feeling well and has weird rashes all over his body, and your wife whose memory is going, and you have to keep going, right? You can't stop. So it took about 2 months for her mind to really return, and my son recovered a lot faster. It took me about a year fully to lose the weight back after getting out of the mold. I was chronically injured, and so all that being said, this I'm going to go backwards. This mold inspector guy that we found, he did full testing on everything after he'd found the photographic evidence, and come to find out, we had over 250,000 spore count in our wall cavity, 250,000 more than that, and most of our wall cavities had at least. So he tested all the wall cavities in the house. The one in our bedroom was super high, over 250,000. Most of the wall cavities in the house were more than 30,000. And it was a mixture of Penicillium, Aspergillus, and Stachybotrys. And the reason why it all happened was, our engineers that we hired forensic engineers, and we hired forensic architects. And the reason why we spent a ton of money doing this, because I needed to figure out why, one, and two, I've been seeing chronic mold people for years in my practice, and they're one of the toughest. They've always been one of the toughest things to deal with. And this journey helped me understand so much more why. The reason it's so hard to deal with it is because you have so many people who are inadequate, gaslighting, non-qualified inspectors who tell you don't have mold and tell you everything's okay again. And so most people that find that they have a mold problem and then they fix the mold problem, they don't really fix it, and they're still in it. And so they continue to struggle. And this is the journey that we went on. They fixed it several times for us, and it was never really fixed. But had I not been who I am, and had I not, had experience, would I have found it? I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know if we'd have stayed in that house another 2 years, my wife wouldn't be with us today. And so I spent all this money on all this forensics. What we found out was the foundation was improperly poured.
Oh my God.
The brick on the home didn't have weep holes, so the moisture couldn't evaporate away from the house. Part of the vapor barrier that is supposed to be wrapped around the house wasn't properly installed around the foundation. The attic had small ridge vents instead of large ridge vents, and so the moisture that would come into the attic couldn't escape the attic, and so it was being forced and pushed into our walls. And it could do that because they didn't properly seal our walls or put enough insulation in. And the HVAC system that I paid extra for, and part of what I paid extra for was an extra dehumidifier to keep the mold from growing in my house, was not even installed. The dehumidifier never even was installed. It was up there, not installed. The HVAC system itself wasn't capable of dehumidifying the house, even if all those other things hadn't have been wrong. So the synopsis or summary from all the forensics was that the house was a death by 1,000 cuts. There were so many things wrong that there's just no way it would ever have controlled the mildew or the mold from growing. And by the time we got out of the house, we had, this is one of the other clue-ins that we just didn't know enough, but there was a film growing on the counters, like the cabinets in the kitchen. And it was like, what's this film? Is it, are we cooking? And it's the vapor from the oven or from the stove, and it's sticking to the cabinets. What is this? So we wipe it off, and a few weeks later it would grow back. Well, that was actually mold growing on our cabinets. But it wasn't, it's because they were really dark wood cabinets. It wasn't like you couldn't say, oh, that's black mold. It just was like a hazy film, but we had it tested and it actually turned out to be mold.
Please tell me that you were able to hold your builder accountable for something like.
We're going to find out. I mean, 2 years later, we're still going through a litigation process. This is why I don't wish this on anyone, because like I said, you already have inadequate mold inspectors and you have inadequate builders who don't want to take responsibility, and you have insurance companies who don't want to cover these types of things, and then you have the government who kind of is in bed with all of these people politically, because if the truth actually came out about the crappy infrastructure, the way the builders were building homes and not actually doing it right, there would be so much liability that it would bankrupt insurance companies across the country, and it would bankrupt most builders, and it would bankrupt it would bankrupt the mold inspection industry. Like, there would be so much liability on the table for bad jobs having been done that they're just not going to look into it. It's kind of like being in the hospital and trying to get them to look into nutrition. They're not going to do it. They've been neglective of that, and there's too much liability on the table to come back now and say we were wrong. It's actually, we should be doing it this way. But that's why I'm doing a documentary, because what we went through, we wanted to document what we went through, but we also wanted to document the scope of the problem, so that when people are struggling in their house, like, you go to your house, it's your haven. It's where you go to heal. It's where you go to repair. It's where you go to get away. And if your house is the thing that's killing you because it was built improperly, or your apartment, or wherever you live, and you're being told that no, mold doesn't really cause illness, and you don't have an answer, and no amount of medicines are working, and no amount of diet change or nutrition is working, and you're still struggling and you're still sick, like, what do you do? And so many people just don't even realize it. And even in the functional medicine community, a lot of the doctors that treat chronic mold, because they haven't gone through an experience quite as aggressively as the one I went through. And again, I was just as guilty of this, so I'm not saying this is a bad thing for those doctors. There's a lot of great mold doctors out there, but until I went through it and had crummy mold inspections, gaslighting builders, I didn't understand the scope of how bad the problem was. And now, looking backward in time, I can think about so many mold cases that have been so challenging to treat. And I understand now why they weren't getting better. They weren't out of their mold. They were being told they were out of their mold, but they were not actually out of their mold. And so, part of it has to do with the way mold inspections and air quality inspections are done. The WHO guidelines, for example, says in order to properly assess the air quality of a place, you need about 28 air tests. Most mold inspectors will come out and do, maybe 10 at most, and that's just if you have a really big house. But most of them are going to do 3 to 4 air samples in an outdoor comparative air sample. These machines are also very delicate, and they have to be calibrated on a regular basis. And a lot of times they don't calibrate the machine. So when they do the test, they're pumping air into this machine, into this diskette. If you don't calibrate your machine, you don't know how much air you're pumping in. So if you think you're pumping in more air than you are, you can get a false negative result very easy. As a matter of fact, it's how the industry actually tricks people into believing they don't have a mold problem when the builder sends out the mold inspector. So anyone listening to this, if you've had a new house built and the builder sending out their own inspector, you need to fire that inspector immediately and get an independent inspector that has nothing to do with the builder to do your investigation, because the builder has a great relationship with these inspectors that keep them in business. They keep them really well paid to stay in business. And so there's a conflict of interest in your own protection. So hire an independent.
I say the same thing for the remediators too, right?
Well, that too. Some states have inspectors that are remediators and vice versa. In Texas, that's illegal. You can't
Oh
be a
no,
remediator
Colorado,
and
we
an
have
inspector.
we have inspectors and they're the same as remediators. And I tell people all the time, never, 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 that it's too much of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, and they shouldn't even know each other. Like you shouldn't even ask your mold inspector for a referral to a remediator because, or maybe you should. If you ask your mold inspector for a mediation referral and they give you one, then don't use them because that's actually a conflict. A good mold inspector will not give you a remediation company referral. They will wash their hands free of even the obligation. And even though that kind of sounds crummy, it creates a degree of separation saying, look, I'm going to do the best job I can do for you, and I'm not getting a kickback from anyone else, and I'm not being paid to find mold so that we can fake remediate your house, but I'm also not being paid to not find mold. And that's what you want working for you, because if you don't have somebody who's just genuinely honest, the couple we found, they lost a child to mold, and that was why I knew I had the right person, because I've lost a child too. I understand what that feels like. You're not going to mess around when you've gone through something like that. You're not going to play favors. You're going to go in and you're going to be all business. And that's what you need. You need professionals in this world to do their job. And, this is especially bad post-COVID. I'm giving you a lot of my opinions today.
I love it.
But post-COVID, what do we have? What did we see? What did COVID really reveal besides corruption? It revealed inadequacy. It revealed laziness. It revealed corruption, and it revealed an entire professional workforce, a big part of a professional workforce who's just lazy and not willing to do their job, right? I like the quote. If you know who Bill Belichick was, famous coach, football coach, they had one sign hanging up in their locker room. They didn't go all like, they weren't trying to like have all this positive everything else. The one sign they had hanging up in their locker room was "Do your job." That's it. Do your job. That's really, and when you hire somebody to do a job, and they don't do the job that you hired them to do, but there's the impression that they did, and we have a whole army of that going on. How many times have you had bad service? How many times, I think we've just gotten to a point in our society where people are very neglectful and even resentful of the work that they're doing and don't appreciate the fact they can have a job. And anyway,
Can I get an amen? No, I'm right there with you, brother. And it was so frustrating back with the COVID too, is because, if it was really about, health of the general population, they would have been kicking down people's doors and seeing what was in their cupboards and their refrigerators instead of enticing them with Krispy Kremes to get the vaccine, so no, trust me, like it's all been such ass backwards lately. But so the thing with mold is, and bringing this to awareness is amazing. The part that gets me is the corruption on such a high level. Then what? Like, what is the regular Joe Schmo person out there who is mold sensitive? Like, when I was at Mindshare last year, I ended up gaining 15 pounds just from being in a moldy hotel room for 5 days. And I should have stuck up for myself. I should have gone to the front desk and said, I need you to move rooms. And I didn't, and I paid for it. And that won't happen again. But what is the regular, person to do?
I think first just be aware of whether or not you're in mold, and whether or not, if you're sick, if you're autoimmune and you're sick and you don't know why, and you've even gone through functional testing and you've tested for the 4 triggers of autoimmune disease, which again, those are food, chemical exposures, which mold, mycotoxins are chemical exposure, microbial imbalance, which mold is also a cause of microbial imbalance, and vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and you've applied all that and you're not getting better, you're probably in mold. And so then the next step would be to try to recognize that. And so the average person first is just an awareness that mold can cause autoimmune diseases. That song that we all listened to when we grew up, anything you can do, I can do better. Remember that song? Yeah, that's the song that mold sings to gluten. And mold can cause the same kind of paradigm of symptomatology that gluten can cause. And so if you've done the right things with your diet and lifestyle and you're still sick, again, this is where you really want to suspect mold and get proper testing. And so there's several kinds of things that you can do to discover it. Number one would be test your urine for mycotoxins and only use the lab in Texas. Don't use the other labs. And I don't say that because I'm from Texas. I say that because we've blinded all the labs and we've used all of them, and we find that the labs that aren't in Texas generally tend to come back falsely negative. The one from Texas is very accurate and very, I've never seen a case where somebody came back with a positive result where we didn't end up finding a major mold problem. I'll just say it that way. I have seen it the other way where labs not in Texas would come back and they would be negative and we still found a mold problem. So the accuracy, I've just challenged the accuracy in some of these assays that are being used commonly by folks. But also finding a good mold inspector. And we actually give our clientele a mold guide, which spells out the criteria that you need to make sure a mold inspector actually performs when they come out, because an air test is not a mold inspection any more than a blood test is a comprehensive medical evaluation. You know, you go to your doctor and they run a CBC and a chemistry panel. Well, that's not a comprehensive evaluation. That's a very basic workup. And an air test of your house and in one of the outside as a control is a very basic workup. And so you're lucky if you find it there, but that's not a mold inspection. A mold inspection is a mold inspector's been trained. Ideally, they're normie certified. They have infrared cameras. They have fiber optic cameras they can run behind your wall. They have humidity readers. They have smoke pencils or smoke machines so they can measure airflow through the house to detect whether or not your walls are breathing mold spores into your living space. They're going to have a general understanding of construction in terms of what kind of construction defects would lend toward water or moisture accumulation in a home. My house never had a major water leak. You know, it was all humidity. You know, that's what created it. It was humidity. It was not like, oh, our roof leaked down into the second, you know, the second bedroom or whatever. It wasn't a major pipe burst over here and flooded a bedroom. It was straight humidity not being controlled properly from faulty construction. So a good mold inspector will have taken, you know, more than the weekend classes that are required in most states. You take a weekend course and you get certified as a mold inspector. So a good mold inspector will have more than that just that weekend course. So those criteria, because you want to hire somebody and have confidence in their ability to either find it or not find it, right? Because the biggest thing with mold is the question mark of, do I have it or don't I have it? Because if you have a positive mold test from your doctor that shows you have high mycotoxins and you're grain-free, because you can eat mold too, you can eat mycotoxins, but if you're grain-free, the likelihood that you have high mycotoxins in you is very low, because most of the foods that are contaminated with mold are grains. Now, coffee can be contaminated with mold, but a lot of your brands today are actually mold and mycotoxin testing now. You can also eat mold in, you know, in some other things. Probably some of the most common foods that contain mold would be peanut. You know, if you're heavy dairy, there can be mold toxins in dairy, and again, grains. So if you're already doing the diet thing, right, and you don't eat any of those foods, which most people, you know, that are going through functional medicine are already there, right? And your mycotoxin levels are coming back really high. You're not eating them. You're being exposed. So it's either coming from your house, your car, or your work, right? And so it's important that, you know, you can't maybe always control where you work or your office space unless you own it, right? Unless you're self-employed. You can control your car and you can certainly control your house, but having good inspections, thorough inspections done of those locations so that you can rule out where you're being exposed is important. Because what happens is so many people, when they're sick, once they start getting sick, they lose their functional capacity. And now what are they doing? They're staying home. And if the mold's at home, now you're just getting worse. You're just staying. It's like a fish living in a poisonous fish tank, right? The water's poison. I can feed you organic food all day long. You're not going to get healthy. So if your house is your poisonous fish tank in your prison, you're going to deteriorate living in it. And it should be the place you can retreat for safety. So being able to inspect it properly and get a real answer without somebody telling you mold's not a big deal. If that's the other litmus, if you hire a mold inspector and they say, well, really mold's not all that big a deal, fire them. what they should be telling you is mold can kill you, and we really need to find, if it's here, we're going to find it, and we're going to use all the technology and all the resources that we have available to be able to find it. But if they're trying to gaslight you and they're trying to tell you it's not that big a deal, that's one of the mold inspectors told us. It's okay to have mold. I mean, everybody's going to have some mold. That's what they were trying to tell us. Here, my wife can't finish a damn sentence, and this asshole is telling me that it's okay to have mold. And here I have a history, 22 years of treating chronic mold. But they prey on your ignorance. And so again, we were blessed and fortunate not to have mold, but we were blessed and fortunate that we had the experience of dealing with people with chronic mold, and so that we could identify it despite everyone's effort to make us not want to identify it. Even family members will do that to you. Family members will be like, oh, no, it can't be that. That couldn't be the possible thing. That's
well, especially if you've got a group of family, and some of us are more genetically susceptible to it than the others. My ex-husband was that way. Me and my son, we were so ridiculously suicidal when we were living in that house. I would have regular meltdowns at the grocery store, in the parking lot, in the car, uncontrollable sobbing, and he's happened to come from work to try to talk me off a ledge, but it didn't affect him. Right. So he just thought we were crazy. And then when I suspected mold, right, no, it couldn't be, blah, blah, blah. Why am I not sick? It was crazy. And then once we got out of the house, I mean, it's amazing. And then, yeah. So no, the gaslighting is for real. And within the own family, it's pretty intense.
Yeah. So we finally got out of it, and it took time to recover. We're putting together a documentary. It's probably going to be ready in about a year. I'm estimating. We've got about 30 some odd hours shot already. And I say documentary, what I really mean is like a massive docu-series, because there's so much to talk about. We're talking about how to deal with mold illness from the patient's perspective, what kind of doctor you need, what kind of testing, what kind of environment you need to recover, and how to detox. But we're also talking about architecture. And, if you're going to ever build a house in your life, you need to know these are the things you need to look out for. And so we're also talking about mold inspections. And so, we're talking about, how the proper way to go about understanding it, because this is really one of those aspects where you can't let the neglect that we've developed in our society, which is the neglect that people have. Again, without being too philosophical, yeah, if you've ever gone to a restaurant and felt like the waiter serving you felt like you were in their way and a bother to them, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, when you hire an expert to come out, you shouldn't feel like you're a bother to that expert, and that because you're challenging or questioning them, that they should be able to answer your questions, and they should be able to deliver it and do a good job. So we're talking about all the different nuance from building to moving out to cheaper ways to do it if you don't have the money to just move out of your house and stay. So we're trying to disclose all of that information in as succinct of a possible way as we can, and that's what's taking so long, because it's a big, massive project, and it's probably going to be anywhere from 10 to 20 episodes long.
That's incredible.
We're gonna push that out, and that's going to be free. We're not going to charge for it. But again, it's one of those passion projects. Just like Gluten-Free Society, it's costing me a lot of money to do it, but I think if God put it in my lap, then he wanted me to use it to serve other people and help other people, because he allowed me to understand how to get out of it, or we would be in dire straits. So that's kind of where that's at.
Absolutely. Hey, so we're getting close to the end here. It's the shameless plug time of the show. So where can people find you? Where can they find out more about you, Gluten-Free Society, get a copy of your book, all that free stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you can buy the
stuff.
book. It's in 8 languages. You can buy it on Amazon or any major bookstore. You can come visit us, though. Come visit us at Gluten-Free Society. If you really want to understand autoimmune disease and how to recover from it, just come sign up for our free newsletter. And I promise you, we'll feed you information you've never heard anywhere else. The other thing you can do, if you just are really interested in gluten and you want the ultimate deep dive, we have a 14-hour free masterclass on that. And people can go to glutenology.net/registration, and that's where they can get the class for free. So either one of those places. And you can also tune into our YouTube. If you go to Glutenology, YouTube Glutenology, I do a free live Q&A every Thursday, anywhere from 1 to 2 hours long. It's just a public service where I answer any questions that come in. And then we do a live show every Tuesday night on just general health topics. So you can always tune in there as well.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you again for everything that you do in this world. You are a huge blessing. And I'm just I'm just beside myself. Thank you again. And everybody else, make sure if you've heard one little nugget of anything that inspired you, please make sure to pass this along. That is how we continue to help people, by getting the message out there far and wide, because this is not popular information. This is not regularly, found information. So please help spread the word, and make sure to have a healthy day. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.
And as always, if you were inspired by anything that you heard on today's show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. That's the only way that we help change people's lives and get this information out into the world so that change can begin one person at a time, the way that it did with me and changed my life so many years ago. Make sure too, right, if you really want to start changing your life, it starts with your diet. It starts with what's on the end of your fork. And if you want to start making changes, go to my website, www.renegadehealthboss, RENEGADE, health, HEALTHBOSS.com, and download your free ebook, your free cooking guide, Real Cooking to Real Life. And in there, you'll also find links to the videos. Don't just learn what to eat, but why, right? Don't just learn how to cook, but the reasonings behind why I use some of the tools that I do, the toxins. You've got to lower your toxic burden, and we can do that in the kitchen and with what you eat. So make sure that you pick up that free resource. It's amazing. And while we're at it, we got to do a little disclaimer. Anything that you hear on this show is for entertainment value only. You cannot hold Heather Gray, the Lyme Boss, Discovering Health LLC, or Renegade Health Boss liable for any damages that may have occurred while you have tried something that you've heard on the show. This show also contains affiliate sponsorship and paid advertising, just a heads up. But to also know that no advertising gets on here without my approval first. It's usually products that I have tried and have my stamp of approval on it. So never fear when it comes to that. But yes, cannot hold me liable. Do not... this is for educational purposes only. Please make sure that you talk to your doctor before making any medical changes. And God bless. Stay tuned.